for joining us. Our guest is Davidson County Sheriff Darren Hall, talking about a range of issues. We've got some folks who've been listening in that have questions for you. I think we got Ed on line one first. Ed, good morning. Hi, Ed.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
I'm a third-generation Nashvilleian. I was born here, grew up here, and I used to call Nashville Jim Crow Nashville because that's what it was like growing up here. Colors to the rear when you got on the bus. How many people don't know that Tennessee succeeded from the Union? Now, I hope I'm getting around some of this stuff that's the problem. Being split up into 3 congressional districts, anybody can move here, stay here one day, and run for office. How crazy is that? Some journalist in Washington State moved out there and was going to run for governor, and they said, you can't run for governor. You got to live here 3 years.
I don't know exactly where he was going with all that, but the point being, the political landscape is changing around the system. City. He's right. The congressional districts recently changed. None of this really affects you and Davidson County, does it? He's right, though. There are so many people moving here. There are new voters coming with new backgrounds, some liberal, some conservative. You have a different constituency. It keeps changing.
Yeah, you know, for one thing I do want to mention, though, kind of as we head off into something I never hardly say on here, I don't think. We also have the most racially diverse organization in the city. And what does that mean? You know, just to kind of be blunt about it, we're less white in the sheriff's office in the city of Nashville. There's not another law enforcement agency in the country that can say that.
So you're very diverse. You have a broad range. Is that because you have a diverse group applying? Is it that you consciously try to be? I've always felt like with a TV station, I like the idea. I think you want to have as much diversity in a newsroom as possible because when you cover news, you want to understand every aspect of it in your background. I also believe it doesn't hurt, too, that you reflect your audience to some degree. Though if you happen to be somewhere, right, that's maybe just predominantly one race, I think it's still good to have diversity because it brings different line of thinking. So do you pursue the diversity, or are you lucky enough to have a lot of diverse applicants?
That's a great question. So, yeah, so in law enforcement, one of the criticisms that have been going on for years, in Ferguson years ago when this thing happened, there was one African-American police officer in the whole workforce. Yeah. So how in the world does the police department feel like it understands my community if I'm not white?
Well, you can't. So, and I don't care what they say. You can't without that perspective.
So it's almost more important in the world that we're in that you look like your community. That's the way I feel. All right. So 20 years ago, I was elected, and we took our management team down to Montgomery Bell and spent an afternoon or two in a room and locked the door and said, look, you know, I wouldn't get on an airplane if I didn't know where it was going. So let's figure out where we want to take the plane. I mean, we can't ask people to get on the plane with us if we can't tell them who we are, what we want to be. It wasn't just my word, it was where are we going to go? And so one of the pillars, there's 4 of them, was diversity. Everybody says that. As a matter of fact, it insults me that cities just like Nashville right now hire diversity officers. Think about that for a second. Hiring a diversity officer to make you be diverse, that tells me automatically that you're not necessarily bought into doing it, in my opinion. Keep hiring them, maybe it'll help. I'm not sure. We didn't hire a diversity officer. We didn't have quotas. We didn't sit here. But I do think you have to appreciate the fact that if your system to select people historically was more favorable to men or more favorable to white people, you need to reevaluate your system. Selection, hiring, promotion. And you have to make it look, and I'm talking about your organization, like the community that you're in if you're trying to recruit the community. So, and I've always said, I wouldn't want to walk in a place and all I saw was white women. I'm neither of those two things. I mean, I can't be a woman. I'm saying
you're going to wonder how can they understand you, or vice versa. So you want the diversity.
And if I'm anxious to do that, you have to put people in places through a selection process that looks like our community. So when you're interviewing people, they can see themselves in those roles. 20 years later, I mean, like I said, we don't measure this daily. What happened was about 3 years ago, the Tennessean did a headline story: Metro Police 82% white. And then it showed 4 of the cities in the country that had decent diversity, Louisville, Charlotte, whatever. It was 60 and 70% white. Okay.
Still, that's too.
It's not even close. And so I said, we weren't in the news. They never called and asked us. I said, I went to our HR people. I said, I'd love to know what our numbers are. Just tell me. I'd never asked in 18 years. He does the math, comes back and spreads it all out, and we were 52% white or something. Nashville's 58% white. So it's not like we run down the room going, uh-oh, 2 white people. No, what we try to do is we say, look, let's make sure that we have opportunities for people to promote. Because guess what? That person's going to tell their family, their community, it's a good place to work.
And that's how you get more people to come
eventually,
in.
you don't hire a diversity officer to police you in doing it. That feels, to me, it's offensive.
Yeah, that should be your goal. The key is finding the applicants who are willing to come. You do the best you can. You pursue it. You can only hire who is willing to come. But I think the more you make that a welcoming place for a broad range of people, you're going to get more applicants.
And I'll give you a great example. Here's a good example. Years ago, we have some positions in our agency that you have to be weapons qualified, right? Shoot weapons. And so, I remember asking our chief deputy at the time. We were talking about several things, but anyway, it seemed redundantly clear that women weren't qualifying with the weapon as easy as men were, and the test. I didn't develop the test, but the system that we had used for 100 years, I would bet you $1,000 was created by a man. So if we're going to shoot and we're going to use that as our indicator, if you just keep being proud of the fact that we're eliminating women every time, we need to evaluate what is it that's making us do that. I don't think we let women who can't shoot have the jobs, but we may need to adjust our process to figure out what is the selection that we need to use in training women to use a weapon. That was just, I can tell you many of those stories where if all we're doing, I always say this, if it's a bunch of older white men as elders of a church wondering why they can't get young people to come to the church, it's because they're thinking like older white men.
Yeah, and I'm telling you, and you hear it at the big level, and you and I are football fans, there is one black head coach in the NFL.
Right.
Okay? That is crap.
Right.
What percentage of the players happen to be black? More than 50% anyway. But I mean, that there's one black NFL head coach, and all the owners are lily white. There's a problem there. If you don't think so, or you're like, oh, you just hire the best, you're full of crap. All right, let's go to Melissa. Hey, Melissa, good morning. What's on your mind, Melissa?
Good morning. I have a statement, then a question. Now, that example that Sheriff Paul just gave, however, on who qualifies to shoot guns, men versus women, men in the majority, is a good metaphor for the question I'm going to ask. But first of all, I just want to say that 40, 50 years ago, people believed in the justice system more or less. They believed in government more or less. Children were safe at school more or less. And people had love and respect for their fellow man more or less. But all of that has changed to a deafening and to a horrific degree in the negative. And I wanted to ask the sheriff, since you have a great perspective, a great vantage point, and I'm sure you have thought of this over the years, why have people lost their sense of dignity, self-respect, and morality? And also, what brings us to mind is that woman who called in and said that when she looked at her Ring camera, she saw this man trying to search for a key, obviously to try to get into her home. So why do you think this is, and from a biblical perspective?
Okay, we only have like a couple minutes on that. If you want to give her your take on that. Sorry I had to cut her off, but when you be able to answer?
No, I think Melissa's right. I mean, it saddens me. It saddens me that we don't trust our government. We don't trust the media. We don't trust law enforcement. We don't trust, churches. You just pick it. Whatever institution you want to use, the data shows you that the public don't have the confidence in it like we would hope. Some of that is our fault. People have made bad decisions in every job I know of, and so, we've been a little judgmental, I think, to realize that yes, when there's a bad person in the Congress and they get in trouble, it shouldn't reflect on everyone. But law enforcement, God knows, in the last 10 years, it's been all over the news. Unfortunately, it's a very easy paint with one brush thing. The media is the same way. Had a lot of falls and flops in the media too, and that loses confidence. I hate to be an old-fashioned dude. I'm not a huge fan of the way social media lives. It's almost evil, the way some of that just rips people apart. And I have two fairly young men and sons of mine, and I just watch all that and how they're living. They can live a parallel universe. They can get online and only listen to people who think like them and live that way, and never really educate themselves in what I call diverse opinion and try to appreciate the other side of stories. And so, I'm just like my grandparents and my parents probably. It feels like society is crumbling because of the decay that Melissa mentions. But Maybe the optimistic side of me says that I hope we can weather the storm a little bit. There are signs that there are good things going on. There are good people in the world. I don't know why in the world they want to run for office the way it's working, or in some ways work in law enforcement either. But my hope is that we weather the storm, we rebuild some confidence, and as she mentioned, it just reflecting. You'd watch the news and believe it. I'm talking about when I was a kid, right? There was network news, and everyone kind of. And today it feels like you're wired to not want to believe it, and I'm just the way it's set up. And by the way, that's not new. I mean, it's been going on for the last 10 or 15 years. This isn't just a last few year thing. And law enforcement, churches, every institution I'm familiar with has some decay. At least it feels like that has happened. And I have to believe a little bit of it is the misinformation that whether it's through social media or the interaction that we've just kind of built into our kids and everyone else, that they doubt so much. Yeah, it's hard to know what they believe.
Yeah, it's hard because uncharted territory with social media and all this. But I'm a believer that it's kind of cyclical to some degree. If you go back through history and all that, I'm with you. I think there's going to be good news, and things eventually evolve, and you figure out what's legit and what's not. Sheriff, thank you.
Thank you very much.
It is a pleasure. We'll see you again in a month.
Thank you.
Take care of yourself. I'll be back with a programming note right after this.